Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. Today I want to put the head back on and valve time this thing and check it for compression to see if all this work we did is going to amount to anything. Aiden declined to join me today. He's got better things to do apparently than spend time with the old man. Alright, so without further ado, the valve timing. I did a lot of research on these things and I looked at some service manuals, and I've come to the conclusion that there are a lot of these engines that are very close and similar in many ways and yet have quite a few little differences. A lot of information out there. Some information is pretty much like educated guess on how to do it because the person has been doing them for a while and just hasn't ever found like an exact number. For instance, some guys have said that there are no available, they couldn't find any available torque values for the nuts that hold the cylinder head on. I did find a howhit manual that did give the foot-pounds of torque for these four nuts, and for these nuts, and for these two little long skinny bolts that go in here, which some people have said you can't find. Well, I found it. Anyways, some other little nuances too, and I'll get to those in a moment. But the first thing that there seems to be a discrepancy on is how to figure out the correct position to put this flywheel in for valve timing. As you might expect, the quick and easy answer is that you want top dead center. You want the point where the flywheel is rotated so the piston is at the very top of its stroke. The problem with that is if you actually rotate the crankshaft so that the piston comes up all the way, there's a point where it's up at the very top, and then there's actually several degrees of rotation before it actually, where that change of direction is happening, where it's getting ready to go back down again, where that change of direction is happening, that you can almost make the argument that, you know, it's almost like it's standing still. It's just a few degrees there, but it can get kind of finicky. I've even seen some guys say, some guys have said that they actually position the second timing mark that they found on the wheel here with the center line of this bolt, this small little bolt that holds the pickup on. Oh, look who's here. So I cleaned the rust off the flywheel and I found the timing mark. I believe I found the timing mark that is described in some of the manuals, and what they say is the T line for timing. What I've got when I clean this off is I've got a very distinct line right here, which to the left of it, it says TF. Now, what the heck does that mean? I don't know. The T for timing, Frankfurters, Farfignugan, I don't know. The other thing that bothers me is if I rotate past that mark. Okay, this isn't a mark. Let's get that out of the way first. That's actually like a box or something on the side here. But if we move back this way, there's another line right here and another line right here. Those two lines are kind of close together. So I don't know what the deal is with those. But that's bothersome. But since this line is more pronounced and it's all by itself with the TF right next to it, we're going to use this line. Furthermore, what does this line up with? Well, here on the crankcase, there is this little web that sticks out that comes to a very distinct point, which makes this an arrow. So right here, this little web sticks out, and if you look at it straight on, it makes an arrow. Voila, one arrow. All right, so there I've got that mark lined up perfectly. So what bugs me is that that piston is just a little bit down. It's not at top dead center. All right, so the next thing I have to do is, before I put the head gasket on, I got to put the other side of the guide for this timing chain back in. So just going to lift the chain up. And this has a track side and then this other weird side. The track side is the side that's going to face the chain, and this just slides down. These two little nubs sit right in here, so That's it. Then there's this little notch out area on the head gasket. That's what tells you where this goes, as opposed to going this way. And you don't want to forget to install your two little alignment sleeves. And next to the head. And I'm just going to lightly snug up this 8mm bolt to keep everything together. Same with this. So now I have to install the camshaft, and the way the camshaft has to go in is this large hole has to be facing away from the top of the piston, or away from the engine. If it was in a scooter, it would be facing towards the front of the scooter. If it was in a go-kart, it would be facing towards the back seat of the go-kart or the steering wheel. In other words, like this, as opposed to like that. So this large hole. If you have another hole here, you want to use the larger hole facing out, like that. Then these two holes right here, which on this one actually there's even little tiny lines right next to the holes. Okay, what's going to happen there is these are going to actually sit so that when you're looking at it from this direction, that they're both going to be exactly forming. If you drew a, imagine if you drew a line from this hole's center through the center, through this center, that line is going to be perfectly parallel to this face right here. And I'll reposition the camera and show that in a moment. If you just put this camshaft in here, you're going to have a really hard time getting this chain on. So looks like the method is to actually tilt this a little bit like this and get the chain on, and then move it into position. And while you're doing this, you're trying to do it so that you end up with this thing being in a position where those two holes are where you want them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut off my little plastic safety tie that was keeping that chain from falling in. And of course the flywheel has moved. Why wouldn't it? I'll shut that annoying police scanner off. Have a little sip of Yingling Black and Tan. Take the edge off. Alright, so hopefully I'm not going to be blocking the shot too much, but I've now made sure that my timing mark is back where it's supposed to be. See, I'm rocking the cam out this way, lifting the back of the shaft up. Alright, and so that right there is right where, well, sort of where I want it to be, but if we look, we'll notice that this hole is way above this plane, and this hole is not visible. So I'm about 1 full tooth off. This one should be up a little bit higher than this one, and then what will happen is when the chain tensioner is installed, that'll pull that down a little bit and correct that slight deviation. But for the moment, that's too far. So I want to go 1 tooth over. I don't know. I'm not convinced. It's better. I might go 1 more tooth and see how that looks. I'm also going to double check and see if my flywheel moved. That happens sometimes. Nope. Flywheel looks good. Yeah, I'm going to try 1 more tooth. Well, I tell you what. If I go over 1 more tooth, that's going to definitely put, because of the spacing of the teeth here, I can see that it's definitely going to put that below the line here. And that's going to put this one, which is split by the line, this plane, that hole's going to be definitely quite a bit above. So I don't think that that's right. I think it's actually supposed to be this right here. According to what one of the guys said in one of the videos, he said that this is going to be up a little bit higher than this one normally, because once the chain tensioner goes in, that's going to cause that to rotate around a little bit. So I don't know. Now you probably want to see it with 1 tooth over just for the hell of it, just so I can prove that I'm not nuts. Let's see if I can get this to one tooth that I'm falling all off, so I can keep track of what I'm doing here. So what I want is I want that to go one tooth in. So that would be right there. That'll be one more tooth in. So now it's exactly the opposite of what I was just complaining about. Ironically. This hole is now higher and this hole is now behind there. So I think I'm going to go with what I just had before, which was this hole being the one that's higher because it's on the side of the chain tensioner. There it is. Alright, so that's what I'm going to go with. So now I'm going to install this assembly right here. This assembly right here is marked with an EX to mark the exhaust side. And since I know my exhaust port faces down, I know that that EX has to be on the bottom. So this EX is going to be actually upside down. Oh, I almost screwed up already. I forgot. I've got to put those two other alignment pins in. Oh, I forgot I wanted to put assembly lube on that, on those camshaft lobes. And right here on these little ends of the rocker arms. Alright, let's do that again. EX facing down. Next little pearl of wisdom. These 4 washers that go on. Nowhere in the manual does it tell you that these washers actually have a perfectly flat side and then a domed side or a tapered side. The perfectly flat side is supposed to face the rocker. So in other words, if I put it on like that, that's correct. If I put it on like this, that's incorrect. The reason why they're made this way is so that when you're torquing down these nuts, the nuts won't be binding and give you, I guess, a false torque reading. At least apparently that's what somebody online said, the person who pointed out the fact that they had this feature. And I even found the howhit manual and it didn't say anything about it, which way these go on. You can kind of tell, you know, how these were on by the fact that they have all of these scraping marks from the nut rubbing up against this side. But the other way you can tell which side is which is if you take a really flat surface. I did this on a granite plate, but same principle. If you take it and put it on a really flat surface, and if you feel very carefully, when you have it in one direction, you can actually feel it rock. You can make the washer rock, and in the other direction, the washer sits perfectly flat and there isn't any rock to them. So that's one way you can determine which way is which. But like I said, I had already determined that this golden face here, which isn't all striated like that is the face that was originally was the flat side and is the side that we want facing these rockers. Alright, so now I'm going to torque down these nuts. According to the manual, these are supposed to be 16 foot-pounds, which 16 foot-pounds is kind of light for my big torque wrench. So I'm using my smaller torque wrench, which is calibrated in inch-pounds, so I have to convert 16 foot-pounds to inch-pounds, which there are 12 inch-pounds in 1 foot-pound. So you multiply 16 by 12, you get 192. So I'm going to start with a setting of 100 inch-pounds, and I'm going to torque them up And I'm going to basically do a crisscross pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to not even get to the 100 yet. I'm going to just work my way towards there. And I go to 150. I decided to change to this torque wrench that I picked up. I haven't used this yet. Figured I'd give it a try. This is made in the USA. I'm not sure who the manufacturer is. Yeah, I got this set to 150. It seems like it was rotating a little bit more. I like this one because when I pull this down and I set it to 0 on the 150, that's right on the line. This one never seemed to line up correctly, which kind of is annoying. So I'm never quite sure whether or not I'm 5 pounds or so plus or minus my target reading. I think maybe I'll sell this one. And now 192. All right. Now these two little bolts on the side here, according to the manual, they're supposed to be torqued to 95 inch-pounds. All right, I just went up a little bit so I could make sure they were evenly tightened, and they're both at 100 inch-pounds according to this, so 5 inch-pounds over. I don't think that's going to be catastrophic. So the next step I need to do is to set the valve clearance. Something I just noticed that I find a little unnerving was that, see how this valve, this rocker is loose with the play in it? That's normal because right now the cam is in the position for top dead center, which means that the two lobes on the cam for the intake and exhaust valve are both facing down. They're actually kind of facing, one's at an angle downward that way and one's at an angle downward this way, which is where they should be right now. But this one, it's got a little bit of play in it now because I just loosened it up, but this one was so tight that it was actually opening the valve in this position. And what I'm looking at that's bothering me is the fact that right here, so much of the thread was showing already, and I had to back that off quite a bit more. So this has got quite a bit of thread showing here to get just this little bit of play, whereas this one has about the same amount of thread showing now and has a ton of play. Now, I checked these valves against the original valves that were in here for length. I'm almost positive I recall doing that when they came in. So why that is such a difference in clearance is a little disconcerting to me. So I think what I'm going to do now is with these both loose, I'm just going to rotate the crankshaft through its complete series of motion a couple of times just to see how it seems to be acting. Yeah, that seems good. So right there, the intake valve is opening, and now the piston's coming back up. That's going to be about top dead center right there. So we would have ignition at this point, then the power stroke, and then exhaust valve opening, and the process repeating. All right, so that seems okay. Let me bring this back around to TDC. Again, still very little play in that one and a lot of play in the intake. All right, well, it is what it is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to loosen the locking nut on the intake valve. Oh man, that was tight. And I've already got this one loose. And I'm going to grab my feeler gauges, and we're going to set the clearance on the intake and exhaust valves. So according to the manual and according to what everybody else is saying online that I've seen, 5 thousandths is the clearance for both the intake and the exhaust. On a lot of engines in the manuals, there'll be a different specification between the exhaust and the intake valve, but on these little motors, apparently 5,000 is the deal. I've even seen 3 to 5,000, but we'll go with the 5. So I've got my 5 thousandths feeler gauge, and I'm just going to stick it in here and move it back and forth until I feel a light drag on there. And then the trick is I want to tighten this lock nut, but as I tighten the lock nut, it's going to have a tendency to want to turn that center screw and change that clearance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this pair of duckbill pliers to attempt to hold this from turning as I tighten this outer nut. I remember a while back I did the Yamaha Grizzly ATV video and had a similar situation here where it had this little square drive, or this little square head. And what I ended up doing in that situation to make it easier for me to adjust that is I actually ended up making a tool. And what I did was I got a little square-headed screw, you know, a screw that has a socket that's square shaped, like a deck screw, and I screwed that into a little dowel or a little hunk of wood and essentially made myself a little tool, because it turned out that that screw head fit this perfectly. I don't know if this is the same size as on that Grizzly. The Grizzly is a much bigger engine. Okay, so I've got that tightened, and I'm just going to put this in there and recheck. And that actually feels a little loose. So, just for the heck of it, let's see if a 6 will go in there. Yeah, it's at about 6 right now. So, it wouldn't take much. Might even be just snugging it up without holding this. Might rotate that inner one enough to dial it in. Let's see. See if the 6 can go in there now. Yeah, 6 is still going in there. Alright, I finally got it, and I got the exhaust one done too. I got a slight drag on the 5 thousandths. So, alright, next thing I need to address is I need to address this this cam chain tensioner assembly, because I think there's something wrong with it, the device that goes in this hole right here. So I'm going to get the motor out of the way temporarily so I can have a little room on the bench here to work on this.